Hello everyone, and welcome back to Clark Update. I'm here with another major story that you're going to want to hear from beginning to end. I hope your day is going well, because today's discussion is loaded with remarkable numbers, growing controversy, and a question that could shape the rest of the season. There is a lot to unpack, and every piece connects to something much bigger than a single game or one disputed call. Stay with me, because the full picture becomes more troubling the deeper we go. Let's not waste another moment. Let's get straight into it. Caitlin Clark had every opportunity to lash out after being assessed her sixth technical foul and receiving another $1,000 fine. But rather than turning the moment into a personal grievance, she responded in a way that caught almost everyone by surprise. To understand why the reaction became so intense, you first have to return to Friday night in Indianapolis, when the entire basketball world seemed to stop and watch. Conversations paused, phones were put down, fans understood that something extraordinary was unfolding in front of them. Clark was producing the kind of performance that almost never happens at the professional level, regardless of whether the comparison is with men's basketball or women's basketball. By the time the final horn sounded, people were still trying to comprehend the numbers. 35 points, 10 assists, 4 steals, and 2 blocked shots. Only 4 other players across professional men's and women's basketball had ever assembled a statistical line that rare. Even more astonishingly, Clark did it while operating under a restriction on her playing time, completing the performance in fewer than 30 minutes on the floor. It was the kind of night that instantly becomes part of basketball history. Before we continue, support the channel by liking the video and subscribing. More than 85% of the people watching are not subscribed, even though subscribing is completely free and takes only a moment. Your support makes a tremendous difference. Now, back to the story. Analysts immediately began reaching for the biggest comparisons available. Michael Jordan's name entered the conversation. Luka Doncic was mentioned. Social media struggled to find language dramatic enough to describe what had just happened. For one night, every discussion surrounding Caitlin Clark centered purely on basketball, the brilliance of her performance, its historical importance, and what it suggested about the direction of her career. Then Saturday came, and it took approximately 90 seconds for the entire narrative to change. Early in Indiana's following matchup against the New York Liberty, Clark collided with a forceful screen from Liberty center Jonquel Jones. She went down, looked toward the officials for a whistle, and received nothing. After getting back to her feet, she addressed the nearest referee and was quickly handed a technical foul before the game had truly found its rhythm. Just like that, her sixth technical of the season carried a $1,000 penalty and moved her dangerously close to an automatic one-game suspension. The celebrations from Friday had not even ended. Highlight videos were still circulating across every major platform. Fans were still discussing one of the most exceptional performances the sport had witnessed. Yet before Clark could settle into the next game, the league had found its most visible player again. That created an unavoidable question. How does a league move from celebrating history on Friday night to disciplining the person who made that history less than 24 hours later? The question did not pass quietly. It exploded. Indiana still won the game convincingly, defeating a Liberty team that had beaten the Fever earlier in the year. The final score was 108-88, and Kelsey Mitchell led the attack with 33 points. For a Fever team sitting at 15 victories and 10 defeats while battling for postseason positioning in an increasingly competitive conference, it should have been viewed as an important road win with meaningful playoff consequences. Instead, the result became secondary. The technical foul dominated the discussion. The $1,000 fine became the headline. The disciplinary count became the focus. Clark had 6 technicals, with only 2 more separating her from a mandatory missed game under the threshold being discussed. Rather than simply celebrating a powerful Indiana victory and Clark's historic performance from the night before, fans found themselves counting technical fouls like the numbers on a suspension timer. The sudden shift felt like whiplash, but many longtime observers did not see it as random misfortune or inconvenient timing. To them, it was the latest development in a concern that had been growing for months, one disputed whistle at a time. To understand why Saturday's technical generated such a fierce response, the story has to move backward to June. During a game against the Phoenix Mercury, Clark was charged with another technical foul on a play that many spectators and analysts regarded as questionable at best. It looked like the sort of emotionally charged moment officials often allow to pass without escalating it into a major incident. In many games, a referee might recognize the intensity, calm the situation, and move forward. This time, however, the call remained. The Wnba reviewed the play and decided not to remove the technical, even though other players had seen similar penalties rescinded earlier in the same season. One technical by itself does not destroy a season, but the decision mattered because of what it appeared to reveal about the standard being applied to Clark compared with the treatment of other players. That was the moment the frustration began turning into something larger. Fans noticed immediately. Screenshots of the decision spread within hours. Social media users built side-by-side video comparisons, featuring players displaying similar frustration or engaging in conduct that appeared considerably more aggressive. In many of those examples, the other players did not receive the same punishment. level of scrutiny, or lasting disciplinary consequences. That led to a straightforward question. Why would one player have a call withdrawn, while a comparable call against another player remains intact during the very same season? Once that question entered the conversation, every technical foul that followed was evaluated through the same lens. By the time Clark received her sixth in July, supporters were no longer reacting to one isolated ruling. They were responding to a record they believed they had been assembling since the spring. They had tracked box scores, archived clips, saved screenshots, and examined each controversial moment against what they increasingly viewed as an unmistakable pattern. In their minds, either the league could not recognize the inconsistency, or it was unwilling to admit that the inconsistency existed. The lasting damage of the June decision went far beyond a fine. It caused a highly attentive fan base to withdraw the benefit of the doubt from the league. From that point forward, every whistle would be studied, every ruling would be compared, every unexplained difference would become another entry in the case. It is also harder to dismiss the controversy as nothing more than online outrage, because concern has not been limited to fan accounts. Indiana head coach Stephanie White is not an anonymous commentator searching for engagement. She is a professional coach responsible for protecting her players, leading a playoff contender, and choosing her public words carefully enough to avoid creating additional problems with the league office. Following an earlier technical, White told reporters that the organization needed conversations about being more strategic in how these fouls were managed with Clark. Consider what that admission means. A head coach publicly acknowledged that the relationship between her star player and WNBA officiating had become an issue the team needed to plan around. It was not something the Fever could simply assume would disappear. It was not being treated internally as meaningless internet noise. The coaching staff was thinking strategically about it. When an organization has to select its language that cautiously while discussing a visible pattern, it demonstrates how sensitive and serious the situation has become. National commentators have also been watching. Analysts from prominent sports outlets have described the treatment of Clark as part of a broader political struggle surrounding the league. One week she is celebrated as the WNBA's most important attraction. The following week she appears to be disciplined more aggressively than some of her peers. Once that framing escapes the boundaries of WNBA-specific coverage and reaches general sports audiences, the league no longer controls how the story is interpreted. The narrative begins moving independently. Casual viewers who previously knew little about technical foul regulations are now asking whether the standards are being enforced consistently. That level of public scrutiny carries more weight than a few angry posts from dedicated fans. It shapes the league's reputation in real time through a conversation the league did not start and has not successfully quieted. Clark's position among the league leaders in technical fouls only makes the image more difficult to explain. She has been listed near the top of the standings, tied around second place with Kalea Copper and trailing only Angel Reese in the comparison being circulated. The playing styles involved are very different. Reese operates as a physical interior presence who embraces contact, battles constantly around the basket, and plays with visible emotion. Copper is a relentless two-way perimeter player who attacks with aggression and brings intensity to nearly every possession. Clark is primarily a perimeter creator, whose game is built around shooting range, passing vision, spacing, and offensive orchestration, rather than the kind of repeated, contact-heavy confrontation that typically produces a high technical foul count. So why are players with such distinct styles occupying the same disciplinary territory by the middle portion of the season? Explaining the shared number as mere coincidence becomes increasingly difficult. It naturally creates questions, and when the league does not answer those questions convincingly, supporters form their own explanations. Those explanations have not been favorable to the league office. In the absence of official clarity, Clark's fan community has built an unofficial monitoring operation with an extraordinary level of organization. Every new technical foul produces immediate commentary, archived footage, timestamps, and comparisons. Supporters refresh live box scores during Indiana games to see whether Clark has received another penalty that moves her closer to suspension. Threads appear containing slow-motion video of disputed moments. Users maintain lists comparing Clark's technical history with examples involving other players whose actions appear equally emotional or substantially more severe. This has moved far beyond occasional frustration. The fan base has effectively developed its own fact-checking department. It is coordinated, persistent, and unwilling to let a controversial ruling disappear without documentation. That raises a serious problem for the league. What happens when thousands of people create a permanent public record of nearly every officiating decision because they are watching with intense attention? Even without a formal petition, organized campaign, or official representative, that constant documentation becomes pressure. Every new incident adds another chapter, expands the archive, and strengthens the perception that the issue is not being addressed. There is also a financial dimension that deserves closer attention. Before the season, the WNBA revised its fine structure. Under the updated system, technical fouls 4 through 7 each produce a $1,000 fine, a major jump from the previous starting figure of $200. The rule may apply to every player, but its real-world impact changes depending on who is collecting the technicals. For someone like Clark, who is nearing the suspension threshold faster than almost everyone else, the financial cost of expressing frustration has risen sharply. A professional athlete of her profile can pay a $1,000 fine, so the amount itself is not the central controversy. The greater issue is what the structure seems to communicate about the league's priorities. When the punishment for a player's reaction increases while questions surrounding the officiating that triggered the reaction remain unresolved, the entire burden is placed on the athlete. The message appears to be that the solution to inconsistency is not correcting the inconsistency, but making it more expensive to respond to it. Fans who believe officiating is the underlying problem, rather than Clark's conduct, have noticed that contradiction. Importantly, Clark has avoided presenting this as a demand for personal protection. She has repeatedly redirected the discussion away from individual whistles and toward the design of the league's officiating system. Her public position has been that the Wnba should move away from its current part-time referee arrangement and employ full-time officials. That distinction matters enormously. She is not asking for every disputed call to be reversed. She is not demanding a private rulebook that gives her special treatment. She is arguing that improved staffing, better preparation, and greater consistency would benefit every athlete on the floor. By framing the problem as structural rather than personal, Clark gives her position a credibility that a simple emotional complaint would not possess. The debate is no longer merely that Caitlin Clark thinks she has been given too many technical fouls. The debate becomes whether the WNBA's officiating infrastructure is sufficient for a rapidly expanding professional league. Those are fundamentally different arguments. The second is also much more difficult for the league to dismiss without appearing unwilling to confront a correctable institutional weakness. Then comes the question of what happens if the next technicals arrive. Once the emotion is removed, the disciplinary mechanics are direct. Under the threshold described throughout the season, another step up the technical foul ladder could place Clark into an automatic one-game suspension, along with an additional $1,500 penalty, without a traditional appeal process capable of erasing the missed game. For many athletes during an ordinary year, a one-game absence would be frustrating but manageable. For Indiana in its current position, the consequences would be much larger. At 15-10, the Fever are in the middle of a postseason race, where every result can alter seeding, momentum, and qualification. Clark is averaging close to 21 points, nearly 8 assists, and around 4 rebounds each night. She is not simply Indiana's most productive individual player. She is the central mechanism of the entire offense. Her ability to create open opportunities changes how defenses position themselves. Her passing transforms ordinary possessions into scoring chances. Her shooting range stretches opponents farther from the basket than they would normally prefer to defend. No other player on the roster can duplicate that complete package in the same way. Removing Clark would therefore mean more than losing a scorer for one evening. Indiana would be forced to redesign its offensive identity with almost no preparation during a stretch in which every game carries postseason weight. How does a team rebuild its structure in roughly 48 hours after months of practicing an attack designed around one elite creator? Realistically, it does not. At least not smoothly, cleanly, or without paying a competitive price. The impact of a suspension would also extend far beyond Indiana's win-loss record. Clark has delivered something to nearly every WNBA game that the league spent years trying to create consistently. Larger television audiences, packed buildings, and sustained national attention. Arenas frequently sell out when she comes to town. Networks view Fever appearances as reliable audience generators. League officials have publicly recognized that her presence has accelerated growth in ways a conventional advertising campaign could never reproduce by itself. Suspending such a player costs more than one basketball game. It removes the league's most dependable attraction on a night when many casual viewers may be tuning in primarily to see her. At a moment when women's basketball has reached unprecedented levels of mainstream interest, is the WNBA prepared to discover what a Clarkless game looks like because of accumulated technical fouls? That is no longer a distant theoretical possibility. It is an active question that could be answered by only a small number of future whistles. Fans now treat every interaction with an official as its own suspenseful event. During Fever games, people monitor live statistics to determine whether the counter has moved. Clark's conversations with referees are examined with the kind of frame-by-frame attention normally reserved for decisive plays in a championship series. Whenever she approaches an official after a call, social media seems to pause until viewers know whether another penalty has been issued. That level of constant observation can exhaust even an athlete who refuses to acknowledge it publicly. Clark is intensely competitive. She plays with emotion because elite basketball requires urgency, confidence, and energy. Yet very few athletes are expected to manage their emotional responses while simultaneously competing, carrying a franchise, facing physical defense, and knowing that every visible reaction may push a suspension clock closer to zero. How many professionals in any major sport are required to regulate themselves under that degree of public and institutional scrutiny? The list is extremely short. Those who experience it usually share certain characteristics: enormous audiences, tremendous commercial influence, and names that extend far beyond their sport. That brings the discussion directly back to Clark. None of this means she should be protected from legitimate technical fouls. Serious violations should still be penalized, and almost no reasonable supporter argues otherwise. The problem is both simpler and more uncomfortable. At this stage, the acceptable margin for error has become dangerously narrow. Clark may be playing the best basketball of her career. The Fever's postseason stakes are rising. Teammates, coaches, broadcasters, sponsors, fans, and the league all have more invested in her availability than ever before. Is it reasonable to expect the most watched player in the sport to perform at maximum intensity while existing only a few disputed moments away from a compulsory night on the bench? The situation looks even worse when placed beside everything Clark has already navigated to reach this point. Injury concerns force the coaching staff to manage her workload and limit her minutes. The physical contact she faces has been widely discussed and extensively documented. Defenders routinely challenge her with a level of pressure that has created a separate controversy over whether officials apply the rules consistently when she is being guarded. Add the escalating fine system, the nearby suspension threshold, the ongoing demand for full-time referees, and the league office's failure to publicly address the larger structural argument, and the burden on one player becomes immense. All of that pressure is arriving during what should have been one of the most celebratory stretches of her professional career. A week that opened with an extraordinary scoring and assisting performance quickly transformed into another conversation about punishment, fines, and suspension calculations. The contrast is not subtle. It is exactly the type of contradiction that makes the public believe the story is larger than any individual whistle. Fever supporters argue that no team should be forced to divide its attention this way during a postseason push. Watching basketball is no longer the only experience. Every game now includes monitoring a disciplinary counter and wondering whether the next conversation with an official will alter the rest of Indiana's season. That tension hangs beneath almost every report surrounding the team. It did not exist with this level of intensity a year earlier, and it exists now partly because the people capable of offering a clear solution have allowed uncertainty to deepen. The July fine, the technical from June that remained after review, the call for professional full-time officials, the suspension arithmetic, the meticulous fan documentation, and Stephanie White's careful remarks are not separate stories. They are connected components of the same unresolved conflict. Ultimately, everything leads to one question: will the WNBA provide Caitlin Clark with a meaningful response? Not a broad statement filled with generic language, not another adjustment buried inside the fine schedule of a league memorandum. A genuine response would directly address her repeated claim that inconsistent officiating represents a systemic problem requiring a structural solution. It would show that the league has heard the concern and is prepared to take visible, substantial action. So far, the dominant answers have been silence and financial punishment. When silence and fines appear often enough, they begin to look less like temporary reactions and more like an unofficial policy. Fans have tracked the whistles since spring, and they are not going to stop. Media attention that began within WNBA circles has spread into mainstream sports coverage and continues to grow. Clark, meanwhile, has shown no indication that she intends to abandon her broader argument about officiating standards. The pressure is therefore arriving from three directions simultaneously: the player, the press, and the public. The league has not yet found a response that settles the controversy without intensifying it. The countdown remains active. After only a small number of additional technicals, the conversation would no longer center on what might happen. It would become a report about what did happen. The most watched athlete in the WNBA could be sitting out a game, and the absence would not be described as routine discipline. It would be presented as the culmination of a controversy that began months earlier. Every remaining Indiana game matters. Every possession carries value. The Fever's strategy assumes Clark will be available to direct an offense that functions most effectively when the ball, the defense, and the pace revolve around her decisions. Whether the next technical comes tomorrow, next week, or later in the season, the pressure already exists. The unanswered question is already occupying the room. A league that has repeatedly credited one athlete with reshaping the sport's cultural visibility and commercial trajectory now finds itself only a few whistles away from forcing that same athlete to the bench during a playoff battle. Viewers understand exactly what that could cost. They are simply waiting to learn whether the league understands it too. The supporters have assembled the record. The media has developed the narrative. Clark has publicly explained her position. What remains unresolved is whether the WNBA is truly listening, or whether it plans to keep issuing fines while hoping the noise eventually disappears. It will not disappear. Share your opinion in the comments and tell us whether you believe the league owes Caitlin Clark a real and direct answer. And subscribe to the channel if this analysis gave you something to think about, because this story is nowhere close to finished.